Hey guys, welcome to this week's edition of Weekly Forex Forecast. We're going to be taking a look at Euro-US dollar, and as per usual, we're going to be starting on the weekly time frame. Okay, so on the weekly time frame, what do we know? We know that we broke swing structure at this point. Okay. Now we also know that we broke weekly internal structure here, which at the time was an indication that the pullback had started, and that we went on to pull back all the way into this weekly supply zone. Okay. Now, if we take our 50% level, we're going to see that we actually pulled back all the way into the premium area. Okay, premium discount, right? So we pulled back all the way into the premium area. Okay, now after we tapped into this weekly supply area, okay, this weekly supply zone, the next thing that happened was that for the first time after this weekly internal break of structure here, we saw a bearish internal break of structure, okay, to the downside, which was an indication that potentially the pullback had ended. So for the most part, we've basically been operating within this framework, this weekly internal framework here. Okay, now we managed to pull back within this weekly internal leg of price action. All right, we managed to pull back into this weekly supply zone here. Now, if we investigate that, we'll see that the moment we tapped into this weekly supply zone, we saw this massive reaction, this huge sensitivity to the zone, right? We formed this pin bar here, and since that point, for like 5 weeks, we had a bearish run of price action. Okay, now currently what we have, or what happened earlier this week, was that price finally changed character at this point. All right, so that's that for the weekly time frame. Let's go over to the daily time frame and see how we can get more information. Now, on the daily time frame, what do we know? We know that this break of weekly internal structure is actually, or that was actually, the break of daily swing structure. Okay, now that's owing to the fact that the market is fractal. It's not always the case that a break of internal structure on a higher time frame is a break of swing structure on the lower time frame, but in this case it is. Okay, so what that means is that this particular framework that we've been dealing with is actually the daily swing framework. Okay, so this pullback that we talked about earlier is actually the daily swing pullback. Okay, so within this weekly supply zone here, we actually tapped into a daily supply zone within this weekly supply zone. Okay, now we can refine it down to this, right? So it was actually from a daily supply zone within a weekly supply zone that we made the move to the downside that eventually caused this change of character on the weekly time frame, which just so happens to be the break of internal structure on the daily time frame. So you see how it's flowing, that the concept of multi-time frame analysis and the market being fractal, right? So this right now is the framework that we're dealing with, this internal leg of price action on the daily time frame, okay? This is what we're dealing with. Now, there's a potential for a pullback to be initiated, right? At this point, the implication or rather the expectation is that even if we get all the way up here, we're going to find the bearish realignment and then potentially target whatever low began the pullback in the first place, all right? Now, here are a couple of POIs that I would be looking at come next week, okay? The first one is this supply zone here on the daily time frame. Now, the reason I'm marking out this zone is because it's actually a flip zone. And the reason it's a flip zone is because this was the last supply zone that caused a failure of this demand zone. You can just take this whole area, okay? So this was the last supply zone that caused the failure of this demand zone here. That's why it's a flip zone. I personally like flip zones because they pack a lot of potential, right? As far as price action goes. Now, the theory surrounding this flip zone is that we could potentially get a reaction here, which would cause a continuation of bearish momentum, meaning that we could even get the pullback at a later point in the future to then continue downwards. That is a potential scenario, okay? However, there are other POIs we could look at within this whole framework. Another one is this supply zone right here, okay? Now, in looking at this supply zone, you could potentially interpret this as a possible inducement, okay? You wouldn't be entirely wrong if you did that, right? Now, if price were to get even higher, we could take a look at this daily supply zone here. Okay. Now, even though there isn't really any clear inducement, one thing that I do like about this POI is this fair value gap here. It's not the healthiest, but it does exist. What that tells me is that it could potentially be a draw on liquidity, which kind of validates this POI for me. Like, there are a couple of, well, not a couple, there's like a whole playbook on how I pick my POIs. Right, so let's quickly scale down to the 4-hour time frame and see what we're dealing with. But before we do that, I'd just like to point out, before we broke internal structure here to the downside, we actually broke internal structure here on the daily time frame. This was the last internal break of structure before we had this internal break of structure to the downside, all right? Now, the reason I'm pointing that out is because on the 4-hour time frame, this break of internal structure on the daily time frame was actually our last break of swing structure on the 4-hour time frame, okay? Remember, guys, market is fractal. But here's the peculiar thing. We can't call this a break of swing structure, right, to the downside. The reason is because this candlestick did not close below this, right? So alternatively, how I interpret this according to my mechanical strategy for mapping structure is that this served as a liquidation of this strong low here, okay? And the way that I confirmed the liquidation was that there was an immediate failure of this supply zone here, okay? This particular supply zone, an immediate failure. And we can see how price literally punched through. The reason I'm taking the time to point this out is because this is actually a very potent model that I use for determining when and how to trade pullbacks, all right? I actually took a couple of loans around here during the course of the week, So what we're looking at right now is this daily flip zone. Remember, this daily flip zone, okay? And now we have a 4-hour framework to go along with the theory or the narrative or whatever you like to call it. And that framework is that this was our last break of internal structure on the 4-hour time frame, right here. This is our last break of internal structure. Okay, so what that means is that we have a 4-hour internal framework here, a leg of price action here, okay, and we haven't exactly tapped into the premium area. The reason I'm pointing this out, the reason it's important is because we have a theory about the flip zone that price could potentially react anywhere within this flip zone and continue bearish. All right, so now we're going to break down how that might potentially happen come next week. Okay, so if we're looking at the 4-hour POIs within this daily POI, this is the first one we begin with, this 4-hour supply zone right here. Okay, now we could also look at this BTS week zone here as a potential supply zone. Okay, because on the lower time frame, I'm sure there's a lot more price action that went into forming this. We can take a look at the other block, right, which is essentially is also a supply zone. Okay, now if you don't want to over refine, you could include this breakout block, and you could even include this last candlestick here. Okay, so now we have potential zones from which price could react within the daily potential zone. So you see how multi-time frame analysis works. You create a narrative starting from the higher time frame all the way down to the lower time frame. Okay, now another really interesting thing to point out here is, like, unlike the fair value gap that we saw on the daily time frame, this is actually a really healthy one. It's a lot of space, so there's every potential that we could see price, drawn to this liquidity here. We could even see a reaction all the way before price gets all the way here, if it even gets that far. Okay, so that's that for that. Because of the peculiarity of the price action this week, I might actually make another video midweek just to catch us up on what exactly price is doing. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for tuning in. As per usual, please like, comment, and subscribe, and have a great weekend. Cheers.